So hi, I'm Gabby. I'm doing a PhD at Western University in clinical psychology. And what led me to a PhD in clinical psychology was all of the exciting research, I think, in part that I did at UTM, so the University of Toronto, Mississauga. And I think all of the why questions that I was always asking. I'm a very curious person. And so a lot of the questions I was asking tended to circle around clinical psychology related questions. So that's how I got here. So kind of like I mentioned, because I'm such a curious person, when I was in high school, I was trying to decide what am I going to do in university. I knew I wanted to do something science related. And so I kind of reflected a little bit and thought, well, if I'm always asking why questions, like why is it this way and why is the world this way? Um, I thought, well, why don't I think about what types of questions I'm asking the most about and what I'm most curious to learn the answers for. And they tended to spiral around human behavior. And so that's what got me interested in psychology. And that's where I landed in psychology at UTM. And then similarly, as I mentioned, for clinical psychology in specific, it was a lot about navigating like what kinds of why questions I was starting to ask at that point, which started to transition more to social and clinical related questions. And then clinical psychology, more specifically, was also in part because I, at a certain point with my research, started to feel a little bit disenfranchised about why we're doing all of this research and what is the point of it, and feeling like sometimes some of the research that I was a part of, or that the research that I was reading about, I just kind of was asking, like, what is the point? Why are we doing this? And it's really interesting research, and I really liked doing it. But I felt for me personally that clinical psychology was where I could do research that really felt impactful for me. Yeah, I think there's the usual factors that everyone recommends that you consider and that I really think you should consider. So these are things like your research fit with your supervisor. So does the research that they're doing align with what you want to be doing? Or if they have a grant and that's the grant that you're going to be brought in on, does your research align with something that can be done in that grant? And of course, whether you want to live in the place where that university is for 4 to 7 years. And whether they have good graduate funding. Those are all kind of standard things that I think most people would recommend that you consider. And I would definitely second that. Something in specific for me that I really considered was work-life balance. I took a year off, sort of, between my bachelor's and applying to grad school. And only then, when I started to slow down, did I realize, like, oh my God, not having 10,000 things to do all of the time is actually really nice. And so I started to ask a lot of questions to prospective graduate programs about what work-life balance meant for students in the program more broadly, or to supervisors. I was often asking, like, what does work-life balance look like for you? And for people in your lab, for your graduate students, your postdocs, your RAs. And that was really insightful. I think I met a lot of people who were absolutely wonderful and very accomplished. And I often got a spiel that like work-life balance is great if you can do it. It's great for you. Love that for you, but I'm too busy to do it. And so I really wanted to find someone who kind of walked the walk with work-life balance, because I think it's a bit tricky to want to do it and to be motivated and put in the effort to practice more work-life balance when everyone you're surrounded by doesn't have that same balance and value in it. So that was huge for me when I was considering grad schools. Yeah, so of course there's like personal challenges that everyone will face, and that will vary from person to person. But I think something that maybe a lot of people can resonate with is there's just so much advice that you get, and it's really helpful. But you hear it constantly from all of these different streams, and especially for something like clinical psychology that tends to be a little bit more competitive, you're always getting like, you have to have excellent grades and you have to volunteer in X number of labs and you have to do all these types of research assistance. And also you should volunteer in a crisis line and make sure you do really well in the GREs. And it's a lot. And I think that was really overwhelming. And I think I felt like in order to give myself the best chance, I had to do all of it. And that's just not possible. I think you need to pick what you can do the best and what will give you the best chances of getting into whatever program you want to do. But recognizing that you can't do it all, I think is really big. And again, kind of linked back to my realization that work-life balance is really important because I realized I can't do what I'm doing forever. I can't live this way forever. And so I think, yeah, just trying to strike that. I think a huge thing was my research experience with Dr. Emily Impett, who's at the University of Toronto Mississauga. I really loved working with her. I still work with her a little bit when I can. Her lab is just such a wonderful environment. When I had decided that I wanted to pursue clinical psychology, I had this really naive idea that your research needs to be related to some sort of mental disorder. And I didn't realize that it could be so much more broad than that within the scope of clinical psychology. And so when I first entered Emily's lab, I was, very sure that I didn't actually want to pursue research with romantic relationships, because I thought that I needed to, if I wanted to do clinical, it had to be related to a mental disorder. And that's just not true. And so I think my time working with Emily made me realize, like, oh my gosh, I love this research. This is amazing. And I love learning about romantic relationships and intimacy and all of these things. And that realization that I could then pursue it in clinical psychology graduate school was awesome. I'm very glad that I ended up working in her lab and got to work with her and collaborate with all of her wonderful graduate students. And then I think another important factor was also doing research in other labs. There's amazing labs that I was able to be an RA in at UTM. And they were super wonderful labs, and it helped me realize that, yes, I love research, but I love certain types of research more than others. So it's not just that I love research broadly, which is true, but I think I really liked the romantic relationship aspect. And by volunteering in other labs, I kind of narrowed down like, I don't know if I could do this for 7 years, or if I pursue a career in academia, I don't know if I could do this forever. And so that was really helpful. So I think for me, it has fluctuated between the degree to which I want to go into academia and the degree to which I want to engage in clinical practice. And that kind of depends sometimes on the clinical practicum setting where I am right now and where I am in the research cycle. But I have really learned that I like both, and they both have pros and cons. And so kind of through vacillating between them, I really want to ideally have a career where I could continue to engage in research while also in clinical practice. Because also I just love the Boulder model, or the scientist practitioner model. So this idea that your research can inform your practice and your practice can inform your research. And because I'm such a curious person, it's really interesting when I'm engaging in research with romantic relationships, and I can start to realize like, oh, this would be great for clinical practice. And then when you're doing clinical practice and you realize like, oh, this is just something that hasn't really been answered by research, so I can bring it into my research and maybe see if I can open another avenue there. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is indicative of a lot of PhD students, but I try really hard to keep a 9 to 5 from Monday to Friday. And that kind of ties into my earlier comments about work-life balance. I chose a lab that was really focused on work-life balance and a lab that would allow me to do that. So I'm not really getting emails on the weekend, which is really nice and really helpful. There's no expectation that I'm working on the weekend. So for me, a usual day would be, if I don't have classes, I mean, right now we're kind of in the summer. So usual day is if I'm working from home or working in the lab, it'll be research. So reading or planning an upcoming study or doing the admin things that you have to do for research, like ethics, which is always a time-consuming process, having lunch, and then continuing on with research. And then between 5 and 5:30, I'm signing out. And it's usually a similar process if it's a clinical practicum day. And so sometimes they'll start earlier, sometimes I'm there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then I'll try to end by like 4:30. Yeah, I always try to just, if I keep that same routine, then I don't feel guilty about not working, because the reality is you can work all the time. And I think that's something a lot of us realized during COVID, is that, oh, we could just keep working when we work from home and we have our laptop with us. And so kind of keeping that routine was really important for me. Yeah, kind of like what I mentioned before, what I find most rewarding is that cycle. So you're really practicing the research cycle in yourself, which is really interesting, because when you're reading research, you might think, oh my gosh, I know a couple or I know an individual that this would be perfect for. And you can kind of start to implement it in your clinical work. And then also when you're doing clinical work, I might think to myself, like, oh my gosh, like, surely someone has answered this type of question in the literature, and I'll go search the literature and it's not there. And so then I'll think, what a wonderful avenue to pursue in research. And then I feel a little bit more like my research has a purpose. So even though it might not help the person who inspired the research question, because we know that research takes a long time, hopefully it helps future people. I think whether it's research, clinical practice, or both, you have to love research, and you have to be curious. I think if you can approach individuals and research questions from a place of humility and genuine curiosity, I think that's really positive. And just really wanting to learn. Learning is such a lifelong endeavor, and it's never this like end goal that you reach. So even when you finish your PhD, you're not like, okay, cool, done. It's always going to keep going. You're always going to be a student. And so I think my advice would be excited about learning. I don't think doing a PhD and this long journey is for people who don't love learning. My advice would be that you can't plan everything. I came into my undergrad with these ideas about what I wanted to do, and when I was supposed to do them, like I was like, well, I'm definitely not taking a 5th year. That is not for me. And then they offered history of psych at UTM, and I was like, oh, I really want to take this course, and they only offered it in my last year. So I was like, you know what? I guess I'll be a part-time student and take this one extra course. And that gave me that extra year to apply to grad school, which, as I mentioned, brought me a lot of insight into my values and what I wanted going forward for graduate programs. And so I think and there's other examples of that, of times when like I came in with this idea that it had to be this way. And that's just not true. And life happens and things happen. And so I think just recognizing that it's great to have a plan, but know that life is gonna happen. Life is gonna take its own course, and to recognize that it's okay, whatever journey you wind on to get to where you are.